If you grew up in the 1970s, you had a childhood that no decade before or since has managed to replicate. The music came out of 8-tracks in the car. The fashion was wider, louder, and more polyester than anything that came before or after. You waited in gas lines with your parents. You saw Star Wars in the theater and walked out a different person. And somewhere in your house, there was a fondue set. This is growing up in the 1970s. 15 things we'll never forget. Bell-bottoms and leisure suits weren't just fashion in the 1970s. They were a statement of belief. Bell-bottoms so wide they swept the sidewalk. Leisure suits in burnt orange, harvest gold, and avocado green, cut from polyester that didn't breathe and didn't care. You dressed for a decade that thought more fabric meant more style. The wider the leg, the better. The shinier the lapel, the better. Looking back at the photos now, it all seems like a collective agreement to abandon common sense. But at the time, everyone looked exactly right. Everyone around you was dressed the same way. That was the point. The 8-track tape was the car audio revolution before cassettes made it obsolete. The big plastic cartridge clicked into the dashboard slot and the music started wherever the program happened to be. Not necessarily the beginning of the song. There was no rewind, no fast forward. 4 programs, endless patience. If you wanted to hear a specific track, you clicked through until you found it, or you drove long enough that it looped back around. Road trips meant a stack of 8 tracks on the seat between your parents and the music cutting out mid-song when the track changed. You thought that was normal. It was. Drive-in movies were a whole production. You put the kids in pajamas before you left the house. You stopped at the concession stand for hot dogs and a bag of popcorn. The metal speaker hooked over the driver's window and crackled every time someone spoke too quietly. The movie started just after dark, and you watched from the back seat with a blanket pulled up, and at some point you fell asleep, and the next morning you woke up in your own bed, not knowing how you got there. Your parents carried you in. You never saw the end of the movie. You didn't need to. Mood rings arrived in 1975 and immediately convinced a generation that a piece of temperature-sensitive liquid crystal could read human emotion. Black meant stressed. Blue meant calm. Turquoise meant happy. Green meant normal, which raised the question of what normal was supposed to feel like. The ring turned black if you held ice or went outside in winter, which the manufacturers called stressed and everyone else called cold. You wore it anyway. You checked it constantly. If it turned blue at the right moment, that meant something. You were 12. Everything meant something. In 1975, Gary Dahl sold ordinary rocks in a cardboard box with air holes punched in the sides and a 32-page training manual. The pet rock came with instructions on how to sit, stay, roll over, and play dead. Americans bought 1.5 million of them in 6 months. Dahl made $15 million. The rocks were sourced from a beach in Mexico. They cost a penny each. The box, the manual, and the marketing did the rest. It was the most honest joke ever played on the American consumer. Everyone knew it was absurd, and everyone bought one anyway. You probably still know where yours is. By 1977, CB radios were everywhere. Truckers had used them for years, but Smokey and the Bandit turned them into a cultural obsession. Every car had one. You picked a handle, rubber duck, Knight Rider, something that sounded good on the open road. You learned the codes. 10-4 meant understood. 10 Roger meant yes. Smokey meant police. You heard strangers talking about road conditions and weather and their own handles. And it felt like you'd discovered a secret language that the whole country was suddenly speaking. Kids sat in the back seat memorizing it all. Your dad had a handle he used for about 8 months, and then the whole thing faded just as fast as it came. Coming up, the most successful toy in history that was just a rock and the movie that turned an entire generation into lifelong fans the first weekend it was in theaters. The 1973 oil crisis changed how America felt about itself. Odd and even days. You could only buy gas if your license plate ended in the right number. Lines stretched around the block and sometimes past it. Stations ran out before the line moved. Adults planned their week around when they could fill the tank. Kids understood something was wrong without fully understanding what. The prices on the pump changed faster than the pumps could be updated. Gas stations that ran dry just hung a sign and closed. That anxiety, the sense that something essential had become uncertain, was the first time a lot of kids understood that the world didn't always work the way it was supposed to. The fondue set was the dinner party essential of the 1970s. Every middle-class kitchen had one, usually received as a wedding gift and used exactly twice a year. Cheese fondue for the first course, chocolate fondue for dessert, the little sterno can burning underneath, the long forks with color-coded handles so you knew which was yours. Somebody always dropped their bread into the pot, which meant they had to buy the next round of something. You didn't always know what the rules were. You just knew the fondue set meant company was coming, and the house smelled good and your parents were in a good mood. Shag carpet and wood paneling were not design choices in the 1970s. They were facts of life. The shag came in harvest gold, burnt orange, and a brown that matched nothing and everything at once. It was thick enough to lose small objects in. The wood paneling covered the basement and sometimes the living room and occasionally the kitchen, and it made every room feel like the inside of a station wagon. There was a lamp in the corner with an orange shade. There was macrame on the wall. You watched TV on a floor that absorbed sound, noise, and spilled cereal with equal efficiency. It was the coziest decade. Star Wars opened on May 25, 1977 in 32 theaters. There were no spoilers because there was no internet. There was a line around the block and a movie that nobody had seen anything like. The text, Crawl. The Star Destroyer filling the entire screen. Darth Vader walking through smoke. The trash compactor. The trench run. You came out of that theater a different person than you went in, and you couldn't fully explain to anyone who hadn't seen it what had just happened. Families went back the following weekend. Kids saw it 5 times before summer ended. Nothing before it, and very little after it, has ever hit a generation that fast. Coming up, the hair that half the country tried to copy, and the carpet craft that was in every living room in America. July 4, 1976. America turned 200 years old and took it seriously in a way the country hadn't taken anything seriously in years. Everything was red, white, and blue. The commemorative plates, the Bicentennial quarter you weren't supposed to spend, the Pepsi can with the special design, fireworks that lasted longer than usual, parades in towns that hadn't held one in decades. For one summer, the entire country celebrated the same thing at the same time, and it felt like something that might hold. The Bicentennial was one of the last moments before cable television, and the internet made it impossible for the whole country to look at the same thing together. Tang was the orange drink that NASA used on the Mercury missions and that ended up in every American kitchen as a result. You mixed the orange powder with cold water, and it turned a color that didn't quite match any fruit in nature. It tasted like orange-flavored chalk with a slight chemical aftertaste, and that was completely fine because if it was good enough for the astronauts, it was good enough for breakfast. Parents bought it by the canister. Kids made it too strong or too weak and drank it either way. It came in grape eventually, but orange was the original, and orange was the one that mattered. Charlie's Angels premiered on ABC in September 1976. Within a year, Farrah Fawcett's hair had become the most copied hairstyle in America. The feathered wings, the layers that flipped back from the face, the volume. You needed a round brush, a blow dryer, and somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes depending on how long your hair was. Women brought her photo to salons. Girls practiced in the bathroom mirror. Boys definitely noticed. The poster of Farrah in the red swimsuit became the best-selling poster in history. In 1977, you could not go to school without seeing that hairstyle on at least 3 people before first period. Skateboarding in the 1970s happened before anyone invented safety equipment or thought to require it. The urethane wheel had just been developed, which made it actually rideable on concrete rather than just on smooth surfaces. Skate parks were being built across California for the first time. You rode in sneakers with thin soles or in bare feet. No helmet, no pads. The falls were fast and the concrete was hard, and you got back up and tried again because everyone else was doing the same thing and nobody had told you yet that it was dangerous. That knowledge would come later. In the 1970s, skateboarding was just something you did on the way home. Macrame was in every room. Knotted plant holders hanging in the kitchen window, owls made of rope on the living room wall, wall hangings with fringe at the bottom. Your mother made them from kits or learned the knots from a friend. The brown twisted jute rope was in every craft store, every church basement, every school fair. You could not attend a 1970s dinner party without seeing macrame somewhere in the house. It was the decade's defining craft. By 1982, everyone quietly took it down and never mentioned it again. A few pieces survived in garages. Some are probably still there. 15 things. But what they really add up to is a decade that felt like it was making everything up as it went. The fashion, the fads, the cars, the music, and somehow it worked. If you grew up in the 1970s, something on this list just came back to you. Drop it in the comments. We read everyone. And if you want more of this, hit subscribe. There's a lot more coming.